Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with a Screenwriter's Rant, probably my most important Screenwriter's Rant to date. This is from the Daily Mail, and I believe this is true. Move aside Spielberg, computers could soon write film scripts by analyzing popular movie tropes, including dramatic unmask and face framed in shadow. Alright, just calm down. Everybody calm down. I have some things to say about the screenwriters. I know, you're freaking out, but this is what I think we're up against. But let's get into the article first. Researchers discovered more than 10,000 common movie storytelling devices. These tropes regularly clustered together in 42 different common groupings. This included dramatic unmask, face framed in shadow, in the same, movies. The team say knowing how tropes group together can help AI write dialogue. Oh, remember when the AI was set loose on, I believe it was Twitter, and instantly turned incredibly racist? That's the kind of thing I would expect from an AI turned loose. Or not necessarily racist when it's analyzing movies, but it would kind of just do the same things over and over again. Because the AI won't have a real understanding, right? It won't have a real organic metric to create. It can only regurgitate other things it's heard in different combinations. So, I know. Even Joan could write a script better than an AI. Little Joan's working on her own script. Yes, you are. Little doggy script. Yeah, it's not going to work, though. It's not going to work, babe. You need to get an agent. The next blockbuster to grace cinema scenes, according to the article, after lockdown, could be written by a computer, according to the authors of a new study examining movie tropes. Here, you want to come over here? I'm reading the article. Every time. They discovered, Joan, that big movies tend to stick to the same core tropes. Yeah, big movies tend to suck. A lot of them. The big blockbuster types are the same thing over and over again. Anyhow, with clusters of storytelling devices apparently repeatedly in the biggest films every year. Researchers from the University of Granada and the University of Cadiz looked over common tropes of more than 10,000 movies, their ratings, genre, and reviews. The Spanish researchers identified over 25,000 tropes that formed 42 distinct clusters commonly found within similar genres by looking at IMDb and TV trope data. Not all the movies are in there, but there you go. The team also discovered modern society was sending some once common movie tropes into steep decline, including damsel in distress and racist jokes. Well, yeah, if you only look at the modern movies, and I don't know how they would classify everything there. I mean, it's, there is some subjectivity in those, damsel in distress. Okay. That would be women in danger. Sarah Connor was in danger, but she wasn't a damsel in distress. So you could see where the computer may or may not, a human may have to come in and go, no, yes or no. Same thing with today. Racist jokes. I mean, 20 years ago, you'd be like, oh, that's a racist joke. Now, what's considered racist, that bar has moved so far left, they could consider, almost anything a racist joke at this point. Initially, they planned to feed this information, this into a machine learning model to train artificial intelligence to write dialogue for non-playable characters in an open world game. Now that sounds like something the computer could do, because even if the non-NPCs said something stupid, the players wouldn't care, right? It would be funny, because if you ever look at, you ever play Grand Theft Auto, they have random lines that they just say, hey, get out of my way, and stuff like that. But, the AI getting better at it, I mean, they might get better at it, but I don't think they'd actually be good at it. I don't think they'd actually be to the point where you'd be like, you'd be able to have a decent interaction with an NPC. But, maybe 50 years from now, maybe, assuming we're not all obliterated in a nuclear war or something. Initially, they planned to feed this into a machine. Oh, I said that. There's a whole, quote, narrative artificial intelligence field that is burgeoning, and that has produced, for the time being, nothing more than quirky Twitter bots. Quirky? That Twitter bot was freaking racist. I mean, if anything was racist, it was that Twitter bot they unleashed that time, if the one I'm referring to. I don't know, maybe they're referring to others. But might very well progress to a whole feature length in the future, said co-author Juan Murillo. Yeah, I think that's a long, long, long way away, and I still say the movie will be, very derivative and terrible. So the team found many successful films incorporated storytelling devices already proven to have been successful in other movies, particularly The Hero's Journey, Dramatic Unmasked, and Face Framed in Shadow Tropes. See, those three, Hero's Journey is a big arc, Dramatic Unmasked is a scene, and Framed in Shadow, that is a shot. So they're not even the same things. Do these people even understand movies? These clusters saw the same genres, including similar sets of tropes. For example, a film with Dramatic Unmasked tended to also have Bad Liar and Face Framed in Shadow. I don't know what Bad Liar is specifically. Bad Liar is a terrible trope in movies, by the way. If you see a bad liar, if you can see a character lying in the movie and you know he's lying, that's usually a terrible thing. Because it's a character acting stupid and not playing at the height of their intelligence, and they should know that they're not very good liar. Unless it's a little kid or something. The specific cluster of tropes was associated with movies that had a mean rating of around 6.51 out of 10 and included Crazy Rich Asians and Saw 4. You're going to do movies rated around 6.51? Those aren't very good movies. They're like watchable, right? If you're rating them from 1 to 10, 6.51? Do you really want to? I wouldn't even go see a movie that was 6.51. 6.51 is the kind of movie I put on the background. You have to be pretty bored to watch a 6.51, considering all the content out there now. 6.51? You couldn't pick the good movies for this thing? The analysis also identified levels of development between clusters. For example, some trope combinations have appeared in films for a very long time. Co-author Pablo Garcia Sanchez told Mail Online the study was inspired by earlier research that used machine learning to predict the user rating a movie would get. Other trope clusters may be declining in use and some just emerging, they found, although further analysis is needed to understand these clusters. Bittersweet Ending is painting itself into a corner, with heroic sacrifice going even further down the drain, Morello told Mail Online. Picking the movies that actually get made isn't necessarily a good thing, because a lot of them suck. You're doing this based on suck. You're doing this based on the mental choices of studio executives who chase money and during certain trends, times of trend. Right now, they're chasing the woke trend. How's that working out for them? Not so good. Marvel's about to take a nosedive, in my opinion. Been waiting for the woke Marvel stuff to hit. And some of it's hit and done very, very badly. Yeah, everybody's talking about WandaVision. Now they're talking about the ending and how much they hate it. So, and a lot of this stuff is very, very, very forgettable, especially when it's too topical. When it's so topical, it's kind of like my videos, some of them, right? When I do a topical video, I don't care if it disappears in a month, because that topical video was only relevant in the month I did it, maybe. If I'm talking about Joe Biden and a specific speech he did, 2 months later, he may have given 2 more speeches, and that old video is worthless. Nobody's going to watch it because they're not going to remember that speech at that time. unless I did something so incredibly unique during my commentary, you might go back and watch Joe Biden, rants about Joe Biden just because I'm doing a horrible impersonation of Joe Biden, but you're not going to watch, my random critique of the news from 3 weeks ago. Some topics are just, they're not going to be around in 10 years, 5 years, 2 years. They're incorporating that, I believe, in this data. Damsel in Distress does not even show up in the chart, implying it's really unpopular. The study co-author explained. Well, you're wrong. Damsel in Distress is popular. It's incredibly popular. I guess this is their data here. Can I blow this up? I can't do it. This is I archived it. When the damsel in distress concept does show up in modern cinema, it does so in a subverted way, showing as dude in distress. Yeah, that's because Hollywood's gone super woke and they're trying to subvert your expectations, and they don't want to hear a lot of BS from Twitter. 5 years from now, completely the opposite. And what about the movies that are going to come out at a Daily Wire and some of the conservatives production companies? They're going to be damsel in distress. They're going to be more traditional. It will probably be shown as destructive parody, which is actually one of the winners in the latest years, Morello explained. Yeah, deconstructive parody. Yeah, I could totally see that, because that is sort of late stage culture stuff, right? Where they're deconstructing everything. And comedy has nothing to build upon, because they're so paranoid of doing anything cool and daring. They're not going to build on anything. Deconstructive parody does exactly that. Subverts tropes by deconstructing them and showing them in a new way. Other losers are kinda or fully racist jokes. Those are not even subverted, but simply go where they belong. Oblivion. Yeah, depending on how you define a racist joke. Like, again, 10 years ago, if you'd said, "Oh, racist jokes," like, yeah, I don't like racist jokes. No, I wouldn't put that in. Now, what's racist? The woke have been screaming racism at everything, so any joke to them is racist if it isn't told by a person of color who is trans and disabled and happens to be in a marginalized neighborhood and telling it in just the right light. The woke will go after you. The authors note that the data they used, including reviews, ratings, summaries, and trope data from IMDb and TV tropes, have a popularity bias toward more recent films. Oh yeah, and it's the internet, so I hate to say it, too many people spend too much time on the internet, myself included. But I think I have a perspective, whereas I think a lot of high schoolers and college students don't have a perspective, say, an older guy like me might have. Plus, I lived in the time without internet. They haven't. If I grew up as they did, I probably wouldn't have any perspective either, because I would just be like, "Oh, internet." Joan, just relax for 5 minutes. I got to do this rant. Nonetheless, their findings and their methodology developed to generate them could aid future research and help inform the creation of new films. Creating a story is a challenging task due to the complex relations between the parts it makes up, the team explained. Oh, you discovered that, did you? Here, John. I'll put you on the floor because you're a pain in the neck. Creating a story, which is why many news stories are built upon those cohesive elements or patterns called tropes that have been shown to work in the past. Or they're built upon classic conflicts and new variants on those classic conflicts. They could allow scriptwriters, directors, producers to consider the best tropes to include in a movie if they want to increase the chance of box office success. Yeah, but what I think it's going to end up is kind of like the Steven Seagal contract. I think a lot of you out there probably heard of this. Steven Seagal apparently had in his contract that in a movie that the distributor would agree to distribute, they would have to have certain scenes. He would have to get a hot girl. He would have to kick a guy, throw a guy through a window. There was like very specific scenes that had to happen with Steven Seagal in order for the distributor to say, yeah, that's enough that we could distribute the film and there'll be enough stuff in it that his audience will like it. This is where that's headed. And it's been heading that way a long time. That's why they do focus groups over and over again. That's why they recut the Justice League. It tested badly. The Zack Snyder cut, apparently, or some version of it. And then they said, oh, well, let's bring in Josh Whedon to tweak it and fix it, quote unquote. And then it tested better. But see, audience testing is worthless. If you've ever been to one of these audience... Well, I shouldn't say it's worthless. What it does is, it takes a movie that's absolutely awful, like incomprehensible movies that you should not release at all, like regardless of the amount of money you spent on them. It can take a movie like that that's so at the bottom and bring it up to medium. Could bring it up to the point where it's watchable. Apparently that was Aquaman, right? Apparently they did a bunch of focus groups. They actually saved or cut money in the budget for reshoots, tested it, took the testing, and then went back and reshot a bunch of stuff, supposedly. Does that work? Well, it probably took, an awful version of Aquaman and turned it into a watchable version of Aquaman. But is it going to make it a great movie? No, it can't. How could an AI do that? It doesn't know. It's not creative. It can't be creative. It can just combine things it already knows based on data that you've given it. It can't actually create. It can't. You could just put in so many elements and so many things that millions and millions of elements would then translate into a combination that only the computer thought of. And you could call that creative, but it probably won't make much sense. Wow, this goes on for a while. Yeah, so this was in the Daily Mail. And again, its main approach was to do NPC stuff. But they're talking about doing screenplays. And they will use this. And I'll tell you why. Because what the studio could do, they could go to get this program or pay these guys off or buy the system, whatever they do. They've got millions of dollars, right? Okay, show me how this thing works. Give me a script. So they push a button and the computer, blah, in 2 minutes, blast out a script. And then you read it and it'll have the tropes in it. It'll even have almost sensible dialogue, but it'll still be like oddly off, right? It'll be incredibly derivative, but it'll be oddly off, and nobody's quite sure what the hell's going on here. But you'll have 95 pages of screenplay. So you know what the studio will then do? They'll then go to a screenwriter and say, hey, idiot, we're going to hire you to rewrite this screenplay. We already wrote it. We already own it. But we're just going to hire you and pay you this flat fee to fix it. Right? And this is something that reminds me of what happened in comics a lot of times. They'd hire this penciler. And a penciler who would be, pretty good in his samples. But when he actually had to do work, his talent really, he'd send in 3 pages. Pencilers would send in 3 to 6 pages of samples, right? And some guys would be really, really good. But if you spent 3 months doing those pages, that's unrealistic to do a whole book. Because you can't spend a month doing a page. You got to crank it out in a day. So they sometimes hire a guy who was like that, and then when under the pressure to do a 22-page book in a month, he couldn't handle it. His artwork would just start to break down, the further he got along. He'd rush it. And he wouldn't be that good because he needed weeks to do a page, not not a day. So what they would then do is get a veteran inker and say, you got to fix this. And the inker would have to fix it, but he wouldn't really get as much credit. And I've talked to inkers, and they complain about this phenomenon where they have to fix a bad art, and they don't get paid anymore, but they're the fixers in the comic book industry. This would be the case with screenplays cranked out like this, because this way the studio can say, oh, well, we own the screenplay already, we don't have to pay out all these royalties now, we're just paying a guy to rewrite things. Yeah, he gets a fee, but he didn't get all them sweet royalties. I do, because I'm the studio and I pushed the button, therefore I wrote the screenplay. Because one thing they do in Hollywood is they fight over the screenplay credit. I know, it's insane, right? Nobody wants to write screenplays. Nobody wants to read screenplays. But they'll fight over the credit all day long. Now, they have a legitimate way to say, well, no, I wrote it. This is my software. I put it in my computer, push the button, and out popped the screenplay. I wrote it. Maybe they put in some parameters like, oh, I want a sci-fi action thriller. And then the computer goes, okay, and craps out a bad screenplay that kind of doesn't make sense. But now all he needs is a rewrite. But really, what you will be doing as a screenwriter or as the rewrite guy who gets a credit and also credit, not a full screenplay credit, that will go to the producer who has all the money and has the software. You will have to do the work. You're going to have to make sense of the AI not understanding what jokes are, not understanding the tone and action between characters, not understanding a character dynamic, and not understanding why the main protagonist can't have sex with everybody he meets, for instance. Right? You could have a character like that, and the AI won't understand that, the audience is not necessarily going to be behind a character who has sex with everybody he meets. Right? That would be odd and weird. So imagine, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, and every scene he meets a new character, has sex with him before the scene starts. That's something an AI might do because, people like sex. Therefore, the main character is supposed to be sexy. The main character should have sex with everybody. It would be particularly bad if it was a female protagonist, right? You've got, I don't know, let's say, who's a good lead? Let's say Sigourney Weaver in Alien. Every scene starts with her, she's just had sex with one of the characters. You wouldn't want that. It would be distracting. It would make her character odd and a little too much of a loose woman. It would change the dynamic, but it wouldn't change it to the AI because the AI doesn't have that sensibility. But this is a real danger, screenwriters, because Hollywood desperately wants this. They desperately want to cut us out of the equation. I'll let you in on a little secret. Well, at least my theory. My theory is that most people in Hollywood hate writers. They don't just dislike us. They don't just wish we'd go away and could do the movie without us. They hate us. They actively hate us. Because we provide the one thing that 99% of Hollywood just can't seem to do. And that is to sit there and think and map out stuff and write. It's a craft that, unless you do it yourself, it's hard to understand. And it's hard to understand what's good, even. Even editors, people who have worked in the comic business and book business who I've met, they couldn't pick a good book if you put a gun to their head. They just can't. They're terrible. They think, some of them think, that, they're very technical. Some of them think, well, this is a very well-edited book, therefore it's good. No. And then some people think, I had a publisher who looked at one of my books and they did the editing and they did it incredibly poorly. So poorly, in fact, I cut and pasted a sample that they edited out of the book without reading it myself. And apparently they had missed so many things or screwed up. I don't know how they added mistakes, but I sent it out as a sample one time, and I got blasted by another editor who just went through it and was like, mistake, 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 mistake. And I was like, oh my God, I should have never sent this sample out. Really, other writers or creative visionaries. Now, there are some directors, some creative people who just know, And I always tell the story. I may not have told it to you, but I worked for a comic book company, and I met the guys, and a lot of the company guys who wrote the comics weren't creatives from the ground up. They had other jobs, like regular jobs, professions, but they wrote in their spare time. But there was one guy in the company, the creative force, and I knew instantly after I met him and met the entire crew, that one guy was the creative force. Like, I knew that. I mean, it wasn't a mystery that he was the creative force behind the comic book company, but I had to try to explain to the other guys in the company why I knew that in one conversation with them. And I said, you don't understand. While you were in college learning how to do practical stuff that made you money, I was in college making the mistakes you're only beginning to make now. And that's, people who write and create for a living and do it a long time, they learn how to get past those mistakes. If you just jump into it, it's not that you're not creative, but it may be years before you're at the level of somebody who writes professionally, because they just have made the mistakes and have moved past it, and you are still making them. You are still trying certain things. There's certain things like, I talk to writers sometimes and they're like, oh, do you do an outline? Do you do character studies? I used to do that kind of stuff. Now I don't need to. I just don't need to anymore. It's the same thing with comic book artists. There are guys I know, they do the circles, and then they do the line down the face and across the eyes, and they do the little mannequin body. And for a few years they do that. And then, I've known guys for a lot of years, and now some of those veteran guys, they don't need to do that at all. They just start drawing. Boom, 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 Iron Man, or whatever. So, it's a skill. And it's a skill computers are never, ever, ever going to learn. Yeah, you can keep that, computer, who's listening to me now because there's an AI listening to YouTube. I challenge you. Yes, I challenge any computer. I can write better than you. Pretty much any creative could.